Hi, it's Manveen. A few hours after we recorded this episode, President Trump announced that he was axing the threat of the extra 10% tariffs on European allies, and that he'd struck a deal with NATO on the future of the Arctic. We don't have any details of what that deal might be yet, but this episode gives you everything you need to know about how we got here and some fascinating insights on what it all means for the future of the Transatlantic Alliance. Enjoy. From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. Davos and the annual World Economic Forum it hosts had been written off over the last few years as being irrelevant, unimportant, over. Well, not anymore. The skies above Switzerland have been filled with the private jets of world leaders and business titans arriving for a front row seat to the grand battle of the moment, the clash between America and its NATO allies for the future of Greenland and the entire Transatlantic Alliance.
Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition.
The first round opened on Tuesday with that damning speech from the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, and a slew of European leaders fighting back against the threat of tariffs on any country opposed to America taking over Greenland. This was not business as usual.
So many red lines are being crossed that you have the choice between your self-respect. Being a happy vassal is one thing, being a miserable slave is something else.
And it wasn't just the Europeans. Among the Americans arriving in snowy Davos was the Democratic governor of California, Gavin Newsom, a potential presidential rival, who delivered an alarming wake-up call.
He's a T-Rex. You mate with him or he devours you. One or the other.
And
people need to stem it. No, the Europeans could be if they continue down this path.
Sensing the mood was turning hostile, Trump's Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, attempted some damage control ahead of the president's arrival.
I would tell everyone, take a deep breath. Do not have this reflexive anger that we've seen and the bitterness. Why don't they sit down, wait for President Trump to get here and listen to his argument? Because I think they're going to be persuaded.
But when President Trump did finally arrive, his speech was far from conciliatory.
And I love Europe, and I want to see Europe go good, but it's not heading in the right direction. It's horrible what they're doing to themselves. They're destroying themselves.
Amid a torrent of insults for the leaders who dared to criticize him, Donald Trump repeated his demands for Greenland, while stopping just short of threatening a war with his allies.
We probably won't get anything unless I decide to use excessive strength and force where we would be, frankly, unstoppable. But I won't do that. Okay? Now everyone's saying, oh, good. That's probably the biggest statement I made, because people thought I would use force.
With the battle still raging, where does this leave the future of Europe's relations with America? We'll have the latest from Davos, and we'll hear from a former British ambassador to Washington on what Europe and the UK should do next. The story today: Trump arrives in Davos.
Well, Donald Trump has just finished his marathon address to delegates about 10 or 15 minutes ago, so everyone's percolated out of the main Congress hall.
That's Mehreen Khan, economics editor at The Times and our eyes and ears on the ground in Davos. We caught up with her just after President Trump's speech.
I would say that there is steady relief, both in the room and from what I can see on my screen, also in financial markets, because that was not as bellicose or as aggressive as an address as it could have been, given how much there has been an escalation in tensions between the US, the White House in particular, and European capitals over the last couple of days. So I think actually people are coming out, they're a little bit astounded, a little bit bored. People were falling asleep, it was long. But actually, if you're sort of just passing out the key messages, there was probably a lot of method in what Donald Trump did today. And I think that method was probably more de-escalation than it was a ramping up of tensions. That's my hot take, having just come out of seeing the address.
Well, the thing is, it's not over yet. He will be talking again on Thursday. We're talking Wednesday afternoon. He does have a habit of going off script, so who knows where all of this ends. But for now, just give us a sense, because you were there on Tuesday when Mark Carney and Emmanuel Macron both gave their speeches, which were surprisingly critical.
Yes, so Tuesday was the first sort of kick-off of the World Economic Forum. And it was also the day in which most of the European leaders were here. Some of them have left. And it was the eve of the Trump speech. I would say, so we had 3 addresses from Western leaders, Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission, Emmanuel Macron, President of France. And I think most surprisingly and strikingly, the speech that is going to live in people's memory was actually Mark Carney of Canada. I think von der Leyen and Macron did what we've heard them do since the threat of extra tariffs was announced by Donald Trump at the weekend, which is say they're a mistake. We do want to talk to you. We are worried about the world order. We think we can sort the Greenland issue out, but we're not going to hide the fact that we are preparing retaliation if indeed more tariffs come ahead. I would say Macron's whole, the whole optics of his speech were bizarre because he was wearing sunglasses because he's burst a vessel in his eye. It just added a little bit to the farce.
It did look very weird. I mean, I wondered if they were Google glasses and if he was reading a speech off them, but they were purple because they were reflecting the light of the set behind him, effectively.
I think if they were Google glasses, his speech might have gone better because often we don't hear him speaking English. I wouldn't say that it's natural or he's the most eloquent in English, but there were stumblings in his speeches. And I think Macron, who's often actually held up as the liberal strongman of Europe, was fully replaced in that role by Mark Carney, who a couple of hours later did, I think, the most frank, most honest speech that we've heard any Western leader give since Trump was inaugurated a year ago. I got the speech under embargo, and often you read these things and they all sound the same. And I was like, wow, actually, this isn't the same. This is actually, a real crystallization of the anger and the frustration. And Carney's definitely emerged as the benchmark for, I think, the fight back.
We know the old order is not coming back. We shouldn't mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy.
And I think the problem with European leaders is they're all going to fall underneath that threshold that he set, Keir Starmer included, actually.
It was a bold bid for the new leader of the free world.
I think there was a vacuum, and I think he's filled it pretty seamlessly, actually. There's not a huge amount of competition.
No, not right now. For you, what were the most striking bits about the Mark Carney speech? He really did seem to put it into a sense of historic context of this entire world order disintegrating.
He made a parallel with the decline of the Soviet Union and how much acquiescence was part of keeping this broken system, the Soviet Union and communism, alive. 24 hours on from the speech, people here are still talking about it. I will be honest, he was just saying the quiet parts out loud. And for politicians, that's often something that we give them lots of credit for. He admitted that actually the West and the rest of the world most of the rest of the world went along with the US-based rule system because we knew it was good for us, but we always knew that the US could basically break these rules at will because they were running it. And as long as it suited us, we went along with it. Now it doesn't suit us, we are calling it out. And that is also hypocrisy on our part because this rules-based system wasn't good for the rest of the world. So I think that was probably the kernel of honesty and truth. And basically effectively said that we've all had a wake-up call. So let's not pretend, a bit like those at the end of the Soviet Union, that we can keep the system going on and keep fighting to the death to preserve it. As I think some other European leaders, in particular people like Mark Rutte, head of NATO, who's been pretty craven, I think, in his attitudes towards sucking up to Trump. Some other European leaders, particularly in Eastern Europe, have also been sucking up to Trump. I think Carney was very much a break with that, and he has emerged as the new, I think, centrist hero for the Davos crowd.
There was this sort of head of steam building. We'd already had Macron earlier in the week talking about potentially using a trade bazooka against America in anger at the idea of tariffs on countries who were criticising America's stance on Greenland. There was a sense before President Trump arrived that, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was going around trying to almost reassure people that he couldn't understand why they were so angry at all of Trump's rhetoric, because obviously this was all going to be fine.
Exactly. So Bessent was clearly, I mean, he's often, I would say, one of the cooler heads, but it's all relative in the Trump administration. And, every morning in Davos, he would have a little briefing with the international press, and I'd go along and I'd hear him say, you all need to calm down. The fake news media needs to calm down. Stop getting so hysterical. Wait until President Trump arrives and you will be pleasantly surprised by what he's got to say. And in that sense, I think he's been proven correct, because Trump spent 90 minutes talking to delegates. He didn't mention explicitly his own threat of a 10% extra levy on 8 countries and rising to 25%. He didn't mention it explicitly at all. He said a phrase that the US will not use military force to occupy Greenland.
I don't have to use force. I don't want to use force. I won't use force. All the United States is asking for is a place called Greenland.
That's been taken as a reasonably constructive step. But he also didn't really say those tariffs are coming on February the 1st, which has been the key issue that has been dominating the potential negotiations as the EU and the US side is going to say. He conspicuously avoided talking about them in a clear sense. So one of the other backdrops to this speech was that on Tuesday, we had one of the worst market sell-offs probably in about 6 or 7 months. And that's an important backdrop to remember, because part of that de-escalation is because I think there are parts of the administration that wanted to also calm the market tensions. So actually, they're probably quite happy with, now we're nearly an hour after the speech about where everything is settled. And the next question is, what is the sort of dialogue that's going to be happening at the highest levels between diplomats and officials tonight and tomorrow?
And Mehreen, the Trump speech, as you say, it was a de-escalation. It could have been much stronger. It could have pretty much declared war on his NATO allies, and it hasn't done that, which is a relief. It is calming people down. Just talk us through it, though, because, he didn't hold back from criticising Europe or people like Macron and Mark Carney.
Yeah, the speech was long, and the Greenland portion of it came what felt like in the final third of the speech. I think some of the potency of what Trump was trying to say about Greenland was neutered by the fact that he kept saying Iceland.
I'm helping NATO, and I've until the last few days when I told them about Iceland, they loved me.
I won't lie, I did wonder if the government of Iceland was now sort of taking panic measures just in case he invaded them instead. But
yeah,
maybe he just misspoke. I'm still not quite sure.
He had a phrase where he wanted to say that Greenland is a piece of ice. He kept referring to it as Iceland too.
Our stock market took the first dip yesterday because of Iceland. So Iceland's already cost us a lot of money.
Hopefully someone sat him down, maybe Marco Rubio, and shown him a map and said, well, actually, Iceland, it's not as big and lucrative.
It's a country.
It's not, yeah,
it is a country.
And a supermarket, actually, in the UK. So I'm not sure what Iceland stocks have been doing. So some of that I think some of the farce of the speech kind of neutered its potency. And the reality is that a lot of Europeans are not used to a Trump address. Most of us will not have gone to a rally or seen him do this at the Oval Office every other week, right? If you're an American lobby journalist, White House correspondent, this is pretty normal. People were bored, people were falling asleep. The gags were sort of kind of jolting people awake now and then. Imagine Macron got a little swipe at his sunglasses.
Emmanuel Macron, I watched him yesterday with those beautiful sunglasses. What the hell happened?
Mark Carney did get a unique bit of ire from the speech yesterday. Donald Trump said some sort of phrase that Canada owes its entire existence to the United States. And it was very domestic, actually. He was sort of hammering and bludgeoning us all to death with economic statistics about how great the US economy is, how terrible President Biden is. This was actually the kind of speech he just gives to Americans, rather than an international set of, corporate bosses and world leaders who, as much as they are invested in what's going on in the US, probably want to hear a bit more about your foreign policy and all of those threats to invade different countries or solve wars. And he was, I imagine, enjoying the fact that all of the world's global elites were stuck in a room where they had to listen to him. And so he made the most of the platform, let's put it that way.
Yeah, certainly that. What happens next? Are you, from the mood of the conference so far, we know that there's an awful lot of Republicans there who might be the key to the midterms. What sort of lobbying do you think is going to be happening in the corridors and at the parties tonight?
Trump will host a party tonight. There is a huge US delegation here, the largest that's ever, I think, arrived. I think more than 60 officials from the White House, a massive presence from the US corporate sector. Davos has never felt more American, I think, which also changes the vibe. People were saying potentially he'd get booed in the Congress Hall, but not
he brought his own audience.
Yeah, I mean, also, it's probably the most craven bunch of people you'll ever meet in your life. So the fact that they would boo him was just not on the cards. I think there will be furious diplomacy between the White House delegation and the Europeans based on the speech. Let's see. It's still a little bit early to say that there's a truce of any kind. But I think from a British perspective, for example, the Diego Garcia issue, the Chagos Islands issue, which has emerged in the last few hours, did not come up. That's going to be taken up as a diplomatic win. Trump reserved a lot of comments for the Swiss Prime Minister about how much she rubbed him up the wrong way. So he had to impose extra tariffs on Rolexes and chocolate. But there wasn't so much pointed, I think, vitriol pointed at any particular European leader. For example, I was here last year when Trump dialed in and he went completely aggressive on European taxes, the whole regulatory system, talking about how broken the European Union is. We know that is the Trump line. The fact that he didn't actually go as far as he has done in the past could be a suggestion that there is a little thawing of tensions, or there at least is an opening. And I think the furious diplomacy will begin probably already in earnest, actually.
And Mehreen, it's not just Donald Trump. He's brought a huge delegation with him. Many of them are on panels, are appearing at Davos. How are the Trump administration at large going down?
Yeah, so some of the Trump administration got here before the president. And I think some of them have actually rubbed up the delegates and their colleagues the wrong way. Chief among them has been Howard Lutnick, who is Donald Trump's commerce secretary. He's a former finance guy who used to run an outfit called Cantor Fitzgerald. He's pretty pugilistic at the best of times, and he's really out here kind of giving the unadulterated MAGA vision of the world. And last night, so on Tuesday night, he was the star attraction at an invite-only dinner hosted by Larry Fink, who's now co-running or co-chairman of the WEF. And it got pretty testy. We know that Al Gore was in the room and was heckling Howard Lutnick, who was sort of saying that the US is back in the sheriff of capitalism. Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, walked out early of the dinner in protest. And I think that's been probably the biggest flashpoint so far of the sort of tensions. They're partly intra-American tensions between Al Gore, former Democrat presidential nominee, and the new administration, and other Europeans who probably just don't want to be sitting in a room getting lectured by people like Howard Lutnick. So in some senses, I think Trump might be a more welcome representative of his own views than some of his other diplomats.
Last night, Donald Trump posted on social media that after a very productive meeting with the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, he'd now formed the framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland and, in fact, the entire Arctic region. And as a result of that, he was cancelling the threat of the extra 10% tariffs on the European countries who'd opposed his stance on Greenland. The details of that framework are still unclear. But before that announcement came, we spoke to a seasoned diplomat about where this whole episode leaves the Transatlantic alliance and how Europe and the UK should deal with an erratic President Trump. So, for some sage advice, let me introduce you to Sir Peter Westmacott.
I used to be a British diplomat, and I was, towards the end of my career, ambassador to Turkey, to France, and then the United States until 2016.
Peter, I imagine you're quite relieved not to be doing that job right now.
Well, I think, to coin a phrase, it would be challenging. Tough assignment. Peter Mandelson, who I've spoken to since he came back, said it was relentless but absolutely fascinating. And I think that is the case. This is a very different form of diplomacy. It's a very different sort of administration. It's a very different kind of president. In the old days, we used to work with the administration, with the different parts of the US government, with Congress, Department of this and Commerce and State Department. Now, none of that's really worth your while. But largely, diplomacy in Washington now is about building relationships with a very small number of people around the president, with the White House team, providing a supporting role, tactical advice, and feeding your thoughts and the views of your government into the other members of the administration team.
It's hard to see how you use traditional diplomacy with this Trump administration. I mean, in the last few days, we've seen him reading out private texts that have been sent to him by other world leaders, by releasing messages that they've sent to him. I mean, how do you, if you were one of those world leaders in Davos at the moment, how do you even begin to build bridges when every conversation you have might be out in the open?
It is very difficult. My guess is that our own prime minister probably doesn't send that many, lovey-dovey personal SMS messages or WhatsApp messages, and I suspect he relies more on telephone calls for the reasons really that you mention. And yet, we've had some pretty vituperative, unkind messaging about the stupidity of British policy on whatever it is. The last one I looked was Diego Garcia, but the time before it was about sending some troops as part of a NATO reconnaissance force really to Greenland. Didn't like that because he thought this was a challenge to his demand that Greenland should become part of his real estate empire. He gets the wrong end of the stick and he lashes out in a way that is unkind and difficult, even for the most discreet and loyal allies to manage. And when it becomes public, I think it's even harder. The problem is, of course, that we all, in different ways, need a strong relationship with the United States of America. For the UK, it's about our nuclear deterrent, it's about our defense relationship, it's about the intelligence relationship, it's about trade and investment, it's about foreign policy. We really do need the Americans to get into the right place on Ukraine, which we care about and which matters to European security. So you can't just you can't just reply like with like. You've got to calibrate where does your national interest lie, and you've got to work out your response, sometimes extremely quickly, on the hoof. Not much time for careful policy deliberation within the machinery of government.
I mean, it's all been on the hoof in the last few days. We have also seen very different tactics being deployed in working out how best to handle Donald Trump in the last few days. We've had Mark Carney and Macron from France sort of making very strong speeches, actually taking him on, meeting like for like. And, Gavin Newsom, the Democrat governor, who's in Davos as well, has been encouraging European leaders to be a bit more ferocious, sort of saying that's what Donald Trump respects, or he'll, eat you alive, effectively.
I can't take this complicity. People rolling over. I should have brought a bunch of knee pads for all the world leaders.
On the other hand, Keir Starmer has been much more cautious. I mean, what do you think is the best way of trying to build an alliance that works with Donald Trump? Do you have to be as fierce as he is, somebody he respects, or do you have to prostrate yourself in front of him and beg to be his friend?
I think you have to keep in mind who you are yourself. And the prime minister we've got is not an aggressive street fighter. He's not a man with a huge ego. He is a man who has worked very hard to develop a private relationship. I'm sure strongly advised by people like Jonathan Powell that this is the way to get things done with the US government, with this particular US administration. I believe that we should also be reminding Trump in private, and by the way, he's not got a great attention span. He's not very keen on detail and doesn't seem to read the briefs. But there's an awful lot that the United Kingdom does for United States security already, whether it's RAF bases with lots of American people in them, or whether it is sensitive facilities that we provide in Ascension Island, Diego Garcia, Cyprus, Falklands, which are hugely important assets for the United States of America. But we need to say some of these things in private and see whether you can get through to him. Sometimes it works. He tosses stuff out, partly for effect, partly because he's annoyed, partly because he's spiteful, and then he forgets about it. But sometimes it doesn't. He seems to go on and on and on about Greenland. And I do think we've got to take the Greenland case very seriously, because I don't think he's going to let that drop. The question is how? How do we manage that? And you do it privately through the private conversations I'm just talking about. But there are moments, for example, when the Prime Minister with European allies has said, this is completely wrong to try to use tariffs as a means of extracting territorial concessions. There's a lot of work still to be done, but I think a combination of the strategy that the UK has adopted so far, plus making a very clear public stand, but also working out what leverage do you have? That's what you've got to deploy in standing up for your own position and standing up for what's right.
A lot of that battle is still unfolding in Davos, and
Yes.
it will over the next couple of days. But, he made it very clear in his speech. He said he won't use force, but he hasn't backed down on demanding Greenland. As far as he's concerned, it is American territory. He wants to buy it. He's convinced he's going to get it. I mean, what sort of leverage should we be using to try and get him to back down? I mean, should we, for example, be threatening to to cancel the King's visit? Would that make a difference? I mean, how do we? What are the levers that do matter to him?
I think it is worth spelling out what aggression against a fellow NATO member would mean for the future of the alliance. Does he really not care a fig about the future of NATO? He may not. A lot of Republicans do. And the Speaker of the House of Representatives has been in London, I gather, producing the usual Trump line. But there is work that can be done with leading members on Capitol Hill in the United States House of Representatives and the Congress, making them realize that going along with every kind of crazy demand that Trump makes is not in the American national interest. And will it make a difference? Let's see. We've got midterm elections coming up in November. Do you threaten to withdraw United Kingdom consent for the United States to use British assets here and there around the world? I don't think the government would want to do that for the same reason it doesn't want to get down into a tariff war by slapping tariffs on American exports just because Trump is slapping tariffs on British exports, because that way lies disaster. I doubt whether there's much to be said from saying, well, in the future, we'll all stop buying American defense equipment. What we can say and should like this, is that the Europeans are going to do a great deal more to look after Arctic security. And what we should be doing with our European partners, but we're very bad at this in Europe, is working more effectively together to develop our own defense industries rather than just buying stuff off the shelf from America and elsewhere. We should do a lot more of that at the European level. And that would both strengthen our industries, but also show that the Americans that we're a little bit less dependent on them.
He's so critical of NATO. In his speech again at Davos, he's parroted a refrain he's often used, sort of saying NATO's done nothing for America, completely ignoring the war in Afghanistan and the fact that America is the only country that has actually triggered Article 5. He seems to see NATO as a one-way street of America just subsidizing Europe, effectively. He's hugely critical of it. He set out his world view by talking about the Donroe doctrine, making it clear that he only thinks of the Western Hemisphere as his sphere of influence. So maybe he doesn't need NATO if he's not that bothered about what Russia's doing. He's not bothered about the rest of the world. Should we be thinking seriously about what happens next? If NATO isn't something America is that invested in, should we be working out how we decouple both our defence interests but also our economic ones? Is that the wiser strategy at this stage?
Well, I suspect there's work that can be done to get him to grasp that America's interests, not just Europe's interests, are at stake with the survival of NATO. Canada, of course, is part of NATO. The North Atlantic is covered and policed by a lot of NATO countries, Norway, Britain, Canada. It's not just the United States of America. Who is going to tell them if there are ICBMs launched from, let's say, Russia against America? Those are the early warning stations in the north of Scotland, or they are going to be some of the maritime reconnaissance equipment we've got in the North Atlantic. What about all those other assets that I mentioned around the world, which are British, but which are made available to America for its own strategic defense? So just giving up on NATO would be damaging to US interests, and we probably got to do a better job at spelling that out, whether in private or possibly in public, without being threatening or confrontational. But in the meantime, I think you're right in suggesting that the Europeans have got to think carefully about what can they do with Canada, I would say, because Mark Carney has been one of the most forceful opponents of some of the nonsense he's been hearing from Donald Trump, to preserve our own security if we cannot rely on the United States in the future. What we are a nuclear power, United Kingdom. We have an independent deterrent, but it's independent up to a point. It is dependent on the Americans for the servicing of the missiles that go into our ICBM submarine launchers. Can we do more with the French without having to rely on the Americans in the future? So we do need to do quite a lot of contingency planning. Now, all that said, and an awful lot's happened in the first year of Trump's 4-year term, but in 3 years' time, it may be that we are going to be in a different position. It's not going to be quite the same thing. NATO may come back into fashion with whoever the next president of the United States is going to be. But in the meantime, an awful lot more, what I would call damage, can be done to our interests, to our defense interests. And we haven't even talked about the message that this kind of aggressive intent towards sovereign territory conveys to Vladimir Putin or to Xi Jinping about Taiwan. What moral right would the alliance as it currently stands have to tell these guys that's not acceptable?
And just finally, Peter, for years you were effectively the guardian of the special relationship of the Transatlantic alliance. Is this a moment of sadness for you?
There's a bit of me that says, this can't be true, this cannot be happening, because it is so far removed from the relationship that we had before. It had its bumps, but fundamentally, the relationship has been of huge importance to our national interest, and I like to think it's been of mutual interest. I like to think that some of it, at least, is an aberration, though I am not naive enough to believe that America First will go with Donald Trump. A lot of America First is going to be there to stay, and we have to live with that. As things stand, it is sad. I'm saddened. I'm saddened that when you've got a government which is leant over backwards to try to be accommodating and understanding, that you just get kicked in the teeth in response. And there's a cruelty there, which is not what you should be applying to allies. All that makes me sad. So does the supine response of the United States Congress, which is there, like the Supreme Court, supposedly to provide guardrails for abuse of power by the executive. That is not happening. It is to me very sad that lawmakers of the most important democracy in the world do not pipe up, more than 2 or 3 of them at best when you're really lucky, to say, Mr. President, this is not America, this is not who we are. And that's not happening. And it's a sadness to see America, so big, so important, such an important partner for the United Kingdom, treating its allies in this way and behaving in this way. Yeah, it does sadden me.
That was Sir Peter Westmacott, former British ambassador to Washington, D.C., and before that, you heard Mehreen Khan, economics editor at The Times. You can find all the latest coverage of Davos and Donald Trump at thetimes.com. The producers today were Micaela, Arneson and Julia Webster. The executive producer was Tim Walklate. Sound design and theme composition were by Mao Lassetto, with additional sound design by Dave Creasy. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with more tomorrow.